house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hello everybody, this is Ian and thank you for joining me on another episode of Native Film Talk. Today I'm going to be discussing a moment in history, Native history. This is something that I plan to do once a month, and in addition to the episodes that I'm already doing when I review one film, TV show. And this moment is going to be the 1973 Oscars, when Marlon Brando refused the Oscar for Best Actor for his work in The Godfather. Instead, he sent Sacheen Littlefeather to the stage, who is White Mountain Apache and Yaqui. And Sacheen went to the stage and went up to Roger Moore. Roger Moore was trying to hand her the Oscar. She refused, put her hand up, went to the podium, explained why Marlon Brando had sent her in his stead, and the reason being that he cannot accept the Gracious Award because of the poor mistreatment of Native Americans in the film industry in Hollywood, and because of the atrocities happening at Wounded Knee. And at the time, in 1973, 200 Oglala Lakotas had taken over Wounded Knee, South Dakota, in a effort to reopen negotiations to the treaties. They were fed up with a lot of different things at the time, one of which was what they felt was corrupt tribal chairman. I believe his name was James Wilson. I apologize. Richard Wilson, their tribal president at the time. They felt he was corrupt and wanted him out. And they really wanted to open up the channels of negotiation with the United States government to make sure that they can have a fair and equitable treatment to all Native Americans. And they ended up holding that town down, controlled the Oglala, and AIM really held it for 71 days while, U.S. Marshals, FBI agents, and other law enforcement came and basically brought down the power of the military, and it became violent, and eventually people were killed, and it was a negative time in American media where the United States was shown in a negative light, because you ask anybody in Wounded Knee with the occupation, why are you doing this? There's Russell Means interviews where he's very candid about why they're doing it, about the atrocities of Native people in the colonization process, in the post, I don't know what you want to call it, post-Dawes Act situation, and how Natives just got screwed with all the treaties. There's over 400 treaties with Natives, and none of them were honored, and they're all just being constantly rewritten, and just they seem like handshake deals almost at a certain point, because it's just like, hey, well, we kind of just wrote that down just to pacify you at the time, and we're not really going to honor any of that. So Marlon Brando was like woke before woke was a term. He understood all of that, and at the time with Wounded Knee, the FBI instructed the news outlets to not give coverage to Wounded Knee because they didn't want to fuel the fire. They didn't want to continue to give visibility to something that really portrayed everything in a bad light. And there was just a lot of controversy around the issue. There was mixed messages being put out of like who's right, and but ultimately the United States government was being called to answer for all of their just crap and all of their really lies and deceit against Native people. And that's what AIM was trying to do. That's what that whole standoff was, that 71-day standoff. And so, because news coverage was blacked out, because there wasn't going to be any more visibility to the issue, Marlon Brando said, hey, I'm going to use Sacheen Littlefeather as my messenger to say what I want to say. And while Sacheen was up on stage, she held up a note and said, hey, he wrote a speech that I'm not allowed to say. And she did say later, I learned in other interviews, that there was no way in hell that the Oscars, the Academy Awards, was going to allow her to say this speech because it was so long, and it is long. And but it's powerful, and it really shows where Marlon Brando's heart was, and it shows how aware he was of Native issues, and how just researched, and how much of a powerful ally he was at a time when we needed allies so bad. And I have that speech right here, and I'll go ahead and read it word for word. Marlon Brando. For 200 years, we have said to the Indian people who are fighting for their land, their life, their families, and their right to be free, quote, lay down your arms, my friends, and then we will remain together. Only if you lay down your arms, my friends, can we talk of peace and come to an agreement which will be good for you, unquote. When they laid down their arms, we murdered them. We lied to them. We cheated them out of their lands. We starved them into signing fraudulent agreements that we called treaties, which we never kept. We turned them into beggars on a continent that gave them life for as long as life can remember. And, by any interpretation of history, however twisted, we did not do right. We were not lawful, nor were we just in what we did. For them, we do not have to restore these people. We do not have to live up to some agreements, because it is given to us by virtue of our power to attack the rights of others, to take their property, to take their lives when they are trying to defend their land and liberty, and to make their virtues a crime and our own vice virtues. But there's one thing which is beyond the reach of this perversity, and that is the tremendous verdict of history. And history will surely judge us. But do we care? What kind of moral schizophrenia is it that allows us to shout at the top of our national voice for all the world to hear that we live up to our commitment, when every page of history, and when all the thirsty, starving, humiliating days and nights of the last 100 years in the lives of the American Indian contradict that voice? It would seem that the respect for principle and the love of one's neighbor have become dysfunctional in this country of ours, and that all we have done, that we have succeeded in accomplishing with our power, is simply alienating the hopes of the newborn countries in this world, as well as friends and enemies alike, that we are not humane, and that we do not live up to our agreements. Perhaps at this point you are saying to yourself, what the hell does all this have to do with the Academy Awards? Why is this woman standing up here, ruining our evening, invading our lives with things that don't concern us and that we don't care about? Wasting our time and money and intruding in our homes? I think the answer to these unspoken questions is that the motion picture community has been responsible as any for degrading the Indian and making a mockery of his character, describing him as a savage, hostile, and evil. It's hard enough for children to grow up in this world. When Indian children watch television, they watch films. And when they see their race depicted as they are in films, their minds become injured in ways we can never know. Recently, there have been few faltering steps to correct this situation, but too faltering and too few. So, I, as a member of this profession, do not feel that I can, as a citizen of the United States, accept an award here tonight. I think awards in this country at this time are inappropriate to be received or given until the condition of the American Indian is drastically altered. If we are not our brother's keeper, at least let us not be his executioner. I would have been there tonight to speak with you directly, but I felt that perhaps I could be of better use if I went to Wounded Knee to help for Forced Hail in whatever way that I can the establishment of peace, which would be dishonorable as long as the rivers run and the grass shall grow. I would hope that those who are listening would not look upon this as a rude intrusion, but as an earnest effort to focus attention on an issue that might very well determine whether or not this country has the right to say from this point forward, we believe in the inalienable rights of all people to remain free and independent on the lands that have supported their life beyond living memory. Thank you for your kindness and for your courtesy to Miss Littlefeather. Thank you and good night. So, wow, right? Wow. Marlon Brando was a real one, everybody. I mean, he is invited to the cookout for all life, in this lifetime and the next, and he is just an ally. Marlon Brando, I didn't know a whole lot about him, honestly, until, college, when I started learning more about his activism, the things he learned. In an interview with Dick Cavett, he said that he had read the book called The Indians of the Americas, and the book was written by John Collier. He was at one time he was a Native American social reformer and American Indian advocate. He was a commissioner of the BIA under FDR for a while, and he just kind of wrote a book that shed the light on basically the real history of what the United States government did. It wasn't all, without a better term, it wasn't whitewashed. It wasn't from the lens of the United States government. It was what actually happened. And, Marlon was very critical of just basically non-minorities, of people that kind of view their place as kind of like, oh, it's not my place to speak up, or, like get over it kind of mentality. Because he basically, in summary, would say during the Dick Cavett interview, in response to the Oscars, in response to the backlash, was the tenets of freedom that this country was founded on only apply to people that are white. We don't like to see that image of ourselves, that negative image of ourselves. We like to see ourselves perhaps the way John Wayne sees us. And that got a lot of claps in the Dick Cavett interview, because I think it's known that Marlon Brando and John Wayne didn't like each other for good reason. I mean, I think he viewed John Wayne as a bigot and a racist, and I don't think he was very candid about it, or very quiet about it. I think he was candid about that. And I think that John Wayne, the things that he stood for in his movies and in his personal stances outside of being an actor, I think were very well known. And the activism that Marlon Brando participated in was counter to what he, pushed in his life. So Marlon Brando getting Sacheen Littlefeather to stand up there, say that short speech, hold that speech, the one that I read to you, in her hand, saying, I'll read it to you later. And she did. She did get a chance later on in the night. After the Oscars, after things settled down a little bit, they interviewed her, and she was able to, read that speech word for word. So that speech eventually did get out there. And Marlon Brando shed light on freaking the Wounded Knee incident when there was a media blackout. And that night, the 1973 Oscars got 85 million viewers. And this is back when there was only a handful of channels. This was a big event. There wasn't Netflix. There wasn't multiple things going on. They weren't competing with any other show. Like, this was it. People were watching the Oscars. And so this was a crazy thing for everybody. It was a great opportunity for people who had no idea to see, like, hey, well, this is messed up. You start asking, you basically turn the mirror around, and it's like, hey, look at yourself. You're here celebrating the Oscars when not to. I mean, you have movies where you have white guys, non-native guys playing natives. You push out things like Peter Pan. You have Henry Brandon playing Chief Scar in The Searchers. You have Burt Lancaster being the star in Apache. You have Audrey Hepburn in 1960 playing a native child who got, assimilated into white culture, and she pretends to be native in the movie. You have Iron Eyes Cody, the crying Indian. None of these people are native. None of these people know the indigenous experience, but Hollywood felt it was okay. And then when you watch these movies, it's always the Indian is going to steal everything from you, including the clothes on your back, and it's going to take your women and rape them, and it's going to take everything from you because they're soulless, they're heartless, they need to be cleansed. They're savages, and even when you do let them into your society, you do let them into your communities, they're quiet, they're stoic, they're revered, they need to be revered as something mystical. So there wasn't that opportunity for Native people to tell their stories yet. There was a little bit, he kind of mentioned in his speech, there's been a few steps in the right direction, but it's not enough. It's not enough because it still continues. These misrepresentations in 1973 were still occurring. And, I think little big man, Chief Dan George was in that. He played a comedic role at the time. That was real profound because natives weren't. Chief Dan George in general, he was a good, comedic relief. He brought that side of natives. And if you're native, we love to laugh. We're humorous. We're some of the most humorous people I've ever been around. But from the outside, the unknown, like people that don't know you, yeah, we are quiet. We are reserved, and we are less of ourselves. I think we're more guarded at times. And it's not like that with everybody, but, at least, I can think of a handful of people in my life that fit that mold in my immediate circle of my family and friends. And I think that's what people saw is like when you come from a native community, and that's kind of people just put that on you. And that wasn't true. And if you are typecast as that, some people, non-native people, the only interaction they have with natives is movies. And Marlon Brando knew that. And he's like, hey, if you only see a native in the film and it's a mystical creature and it's a noble savage and a savage Indian and the alcoholic, the drunken Indian, that's all you're going to know. That's all you're going to think. And then, when it came time to something like Wounded Knee incident, when there are still natives out there advocating for change, advocating for fair, equal rights, you're going to look at them and are you going to say, oh, look and help those people? Or are you going to say, oh, those are those savages from the movies. Those are those noble Indians. Those, why are they attacking us? Why are they, look, it's cowboys and Indians all over again. They're circling the wagons again. Or if you have positive representation, you have accurate depictions of Native Americans, are you actually going to think of us in a positive light and say, hey, these people have been screwed over in more ways than one, and it's completely out of their control, and they need allies. They need people that can help them. And Marlon Brando did that. I will forever be grateful for Marlon Brando and what he did, because that was at a time when who knows what would have happened had he not done that. How long it would have taken for the tide to change, if ever. Because after that, stuff did change. Eventually, representation did start going in a positive direction. I don't know how much of that would be attributed to that moment, that night in the Oscars, but the Oscars is good for that. The Oscars does react. Sometimes they overcorrect, sometimes they don't do enough, but they do react. Eventually they do. Hashtag Oscars so white is an example. Now they're putting in a diversity requirement going into 2024 for Best Picture. You have to meet certain diversity requirements if you are going to be a nominee for Best Picture. So it was amazing. Marlon Brando, he got a lot of backlash too during Sacheen's speech. There was a lot of boos in that crowd. People were not happy. They Dick Cavett. So I had to look this up. Dick Cavett was like a Conan O'Brien. He was like a Johnny Carson character. This was a talk show host and, Jay Leno type, where it was just real candid interviews. And from what little research I had done about Dick Cavett, that he was kind of one of the first people that did interviews like him, where it's almost like between two ferns. Like they had that set up, except they're on the stage, obviously in front of a live audience, but they're like sitting in front of each other. There's no table in front of Dick Cavett like how modern talk shows are, even like Johnny Carson, where they had like a desk and then their guests were sitting in front of them. Like the Dick Cavett interview that I saw, they had like a little tiny coffee table looking thing in front of them, and they were sitting just more like Ellen, I guess. And they were just right in front of each other. And while they were interviewing, Dick Cavett, he's real candid. It was like almost a podcast interview. He didn't seem scripted, it didn't seem fake. There was no fake laughs or anything. Like he was just off the cuff and I really appreciate that interview because it seemed genuine. Frankly, it seemed like a genuine interview to me, and he was very honest about that night. You know, after the Oscars, Marlon Brando went on to Dick Cavett show and went and talked to him, and Dick Cavett asked him, he's like, so what was that all about? You know, why did you do that? Can you expand more about why you want to shed light on the mistreatment of Native Americans in Hollywood? And when they recapped Sacheen's speech, Dick Cavett said, what did he say? He said, the booing made me sore, you know, verbatim. That's what he said. You know, I didn't like the booing. And Marlon's response, well, I think the people were booing at me. This moment is sacrosanct. You're ruining our fantasy. You're ruining it with the intrusion of a little reality. I suppose it was unkind of me, but there was a larger issue, and it's an issue that the motion picture industry has never addressed. So it's great. You know, freaking Marlon Brando. And Dick Cavett went on later to say, you know, he thought it was a good idea, but also he said there was some backlash. There was some boos there. And he said, you know, somebody else, I don't remember who exactly he mentioned, but shortly after said, because, okay, so I need to frame this. So the Oscars, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the Oscars, Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress are always presented last. These are like the most important awards of the year. And so they present things like Best Director, Best Score, Best Music, Best Musical, all that, and like Best Comedy, all of that stuff is early. Just early in the day. And there's even stuff that doesn't even make it to the motion picture, like Best Native American Music, you know. I'm sorry, that is the Grammys. But stuff like that, you know what I mean. But Oscars, the Academy Awards, it's all structured that way. Like there's stuff like that. So, Best Actor, Best Actress, culminating event. Like it's all building up to this climax when it's like, who's going to win? And this is a big deal. This is a big send-off. So for Marlon Brando to do this at that time when it's like one of the most important parts of the night, and in this case, it was the second to the last award, because right after Sacheen had accepted on behalf of Marlon Brando, as she walked off the stage, the host came up and said, like, hey, coming up right now is going to be the guy who's going to present the Best Picture. And who came up was a young Clint Eastwood. He had just done Dirty Harry, so I think people had just known him for like his role in that, you know, being Dirty Harry. So he comes up and he makes a snide remark. You know, as soon as he comes up to the stage, he says, I don't know if I should present this award on behalf of all the cowboys killed in John Ford westerns over the years. And the audience goes crazy. There's claps and laughs, but mostly claps. And people were happy. People were losing their minds. And you can interpret it that multiple ways. You know, Clint Eastwood has his history. He has his labels. But at this time, this was the first time really anyone had hijacked Oscars to talk about a cause, talk about awareness, raise awareness for something. And from interviews that I've seen, it was tense after Sacheen came on stage. People were wondering, like, is it canceled? Are we still on air? What's going on? Is the Oscars still going on? So I think people were nervously laughing and nervously clapping. After she walked off stage, people were confused or like, what the hell is happening? So imagine being an audience member in the Academy Awards, and you're just like, what's happening right now? And then as she's walking off stage, Clint Eastwood, I'd like to think he's trying to add levity to the situation. It was a poor joke. It was a bad joke. It's kind of a douche move, you know? Not kind of, it is a douche move. I had always seen Sacheen's scene, that clip on YouTube. I've seen that numerous times. I had never even thought to look after to see what was said. For some reason, I just assumed that was the night. That was the end of the night, because that's how it is now. Sometimes, I think they alternate, actually. Best actor, best actress, they alternate them. But I think, yeah, so Best Picture is always last. But it just never occurred to me, like, oh, what won Best Picture in 1973? I just never thought to do it, and so I just kept watching. I found the clip, and, you know, I was like, let me watch Best Picture for The Godfather, and see if anybody says anything about Sacheen being on stage or Marlon Brando not being present for that win. And there it is, freaking Clint Eastwood, dropped that freaking line, and shows how it was insensitive, really, and it shows how disconnected he was. And for someone who is a Western, film star who was around natives and was in movies where there were native people, like, that was really misguided, and shows how disconnected he was at that time in 1973. His perspective and worldview might have evolved over time, but at that time in 73, that's where he was. I think that Marlon Brando was he's very aware of a lot of things, and one of the most prominent things he said in his Dick Cavett interview was, Native children grow up seeing negative representation on film, and they grow up with a negative image of themselves, and it lasts a lifetime. I mean, he was just so eloquent with his word choice, and he could say a lot with saying so little. And man, I mean, that isn't that the truth, I mean, that's why I wanted to do this podcast. When I was a kid, in the intro, I mentioned that I thought I was a lame Indian. I thought I was a bad native. I thought that being Navajo sucked because we didn't do anything cool in TV. We didn't have any cool stuff, quote unquote, in the movies. We didn't ride horses. We didn't have bow and arrows, and we didn't wear war paint. And I was just bummed, and I had a negative image of myself because I wasn't on TV. And so I glommed on to other natives, other cultures, and I thought, like, man, I want to do that. I want to do that. When I had no idea I had my own culture that should be respected, revered, embraced, and is a part of me. And eventually, of course, I did. But when you're a kid, you're so impressionable. What you see on TV, if you remember as a kid, you'll do one thing over and over just because you have so much fun and it's so new and refreshing. I know people in my age where, VHS was around, you watched those movies, whatever movie that was. For me, it was Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Terminator 2. I don't know why those two, but for some reason it was, and I watched the hell out of those. And then eventually it was like the Goofy movie and Space Jam as I got older. But like those movies were run until they were, the picture was all fuzzy and it was clear you'd watched it too many times. But I had also seen Pocahontas and Dances with Wolves and a bunch of other stuff that my uncles and my older relatives showed me, and so Marlon Brando understood. He was very aware, and this moment in history in 1973 was significant. I think it truly altered the timeline for Native representation in film. And Sacheen Littlefeather, freaking hats off to her, she will talk about icon in Native history. She had later in an interview said that Coretta King, the widow to Martin Luther King, reached out to her. Cesar Chavez reached out to her individually too and just went and thanked her and said, like, hey, you're doing a great thing for the civil rights movement, to get equity across the board, to bring awareness to the inadequacies in our country. You're doing a great job. Keep it up. Thank you so much for what you did on the Oscars night. So it was a big deal, and I think Marlon Brando too. Last thing I'll say about him is just he made it seem like, the Oscars is why not? And it's not just a night to dress up and pat yourself on the back and say, like, oh, look at how great we are. Look at all the great work we did this past year, and toast to each other. That's so insular. That's so just, in a way, misguided, because it's not taking into consideration all the crap that's going on in the rest of the world, in the rest of your country, in your own backyard with other Americans. So I think that now it would be considered like woke. And, it's akin to Colin Kaepernick kneeling and Occupy Wall Street. These other things that have happened, they're mainstream now, and it's kind of something you do. But back then it was unfounded. So it was really a trailblazing idea to do what he did. And the dad joke that I have for The Godfather is the Academy Award. The Academy gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, and he refused it. So he gave him the Oscar and he didn't want it. And the word is that he still doesn't have it. I mean, obviously he's passed now, but he doesn't have it. Never took it. Such a great moment in film. 1973. Fantastic. Thank God for the Sacheen Littlefeather. Thank God for Marlon Brando. And one thing, I'll close with this before I get going. Charlie Hill, famous Native American comedian. If you don't know who Charlie Hill is, Google or put in YouTube Charlie Hill on the Richard Pryor show. The Richard Pryor show was like a failed experiment of like, hey, Richard Pryor's hilarious. Let's just give him a TV show. He's gold. Everything that comes out of his mouth is going to be great. It flopped. But Richard Pryor would bring on comedians much like, regular talk shows do now. Like they kind of give them a feature spot, a few minutes of just showing their talent. And so Charlie Hill, I'll make this a native in film moment. This was a big one. But one joke that he drops is, I want a native to get in there and win the Oscars so we can, turn it down and say, we're turning down the Oscar because of the mistreatment of Marlon Brando. And, at that time, this was back in the 70s when this moment happened, this stand-up bit, and, natives loved it. At least the natives that were aware. I don't know how aware native people were of the Oscars if they cared, but the people that did, they were like, hell yeah, Marlon Brando stepping up for us, putting yourself on the line for us. So there it is. That was a significant moment in 1973. Last thing before I go, next moment in history I plan to do will be Wes Studi, the first Native American to win an honorary Oscar. That's going to be it. And then eventually I'll do Charlie Hill on the Richard Pryor show. Y'all have a good one.